Hi, good morning, everyone. This is IDG again, IDG time. And this time we are talking about a unique museum. And Paul Abraham, who's one of us and who's the founder of the museum, we'll talk about Sarmaya and among other things, his journey after he left college. So Paul, you told me that you're a career banker, right? And
Yep.
I've been a banker half my career. And I have always been told that bankers are termed as boring bankers, right? So how is it that a boring banker is doing such interesting stuff? How did this boring banker become so interesting?
Okay, great. I think maybe because in college, I did spend some time in the junior common room, and it was some of those hazy mornings were quite interesting, and maybe some of that stayed with me. No, I think it's a whole host of things, Sonu. At the end of the day, I grew up in Delhi. Lived and grew up in Hoskas and amongst so much visible history. And my dad also was, a very keen, person interested in history, let's put it that way. And then, living in Delhi, if you got to be seriously, blind to the tangible history around you. I kind of, university special would go past everything, which is historical. And I'll show you some of the images we used to see daily and really sometimes not think about the stories behind them. So, yeah, a lot of this is about consciously making some choices to stay connected with many other things other than just career and job and professional, longevity.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think I will talk about that.
We'll talk about it.
What I said was that when I retire, I don't want to be suddenly feeling a sense of complete emptiness. I should be able to really enjoy myself with the same vigor that I had while I was working. And I think that's really the idea.
Yeah. So I'm sure that while you were working, collections had a different connotation as a banker. And the word collections is very, very important, right? But
Yes.
for you, collections has always had two sets of meanings, one as a banker and one as a collector. So since we're talking about, working, non-work and after work, so just take us through your journey about how did you get interested in the collections part of it. There is this story about your dad gifting you some sets of ancient coins, and then you as a teenager, diving into books to find out more about it. So just tell us a little more about it.
So can I share a few slides so that I'll illustrate the point a little better?
Sure.
Yeah. So you can see this?
Yeah.
Okay. So Sarmaya is something that actually formally started in 2015. And as some of you may know, I lost my wife in 2014 to cancer. So this was started as an initiative in her memory. I have since married again, and my wife Pavitra, who runs her own design practice, actually partners me in this whole museum initiative. And we've been, working at it. I come from the history and collector perspective. She comes from the, storytelling brand custodian perspective. And between us, hopefully, we try and do a good job when we are not fighting about which direction Sarmaya should take. But yeah, so this started many, many years ago. Again, started in Delhi. My dad relocated to Delhi from Kerala in 1948. So we are all Delhi hands in many ways. And that's him. with me sitting in his lap. And this was in our garden in Church Lane. This is just behind Central Secretariat for those who are familiar with Delhi. And I had the Church of the Redemption, the cathedral for the Anglican Church in front of us. I had a mosque abutting our home. And right behind us, against the wall of the compound of the house, was the Gurdwara Rakabganj. So, I used to hear church songs, I used to hear the azan, I used to hear the kirtans. So it was a lovely time, and I used to walk to school, which was in St. Columbus. And then I grew up, we moved to Haus Khas, and that's where my teenage years were spent. And then, of course, I joined college in 77, finished in 80. And of course, those are all some of the greatest and fun times one had. So college was just fabulous. Everything from, classes, of course, occasionally, but all the extracurricular was particularly special. So that was it. And my dad actually, I don't know if you can see this. So that's the original seed for Sarmaya. This was the bottle that he gave me as a kid. And this was his little pottery of coins that he had bought with him from Kerala when he came. These are coins from Travancore. And that got me going in terms of an interest in coins. And then, of course, in Delhi, there was no way I could collect South Indian coins. None of that was really available. But what was available in plenty, once I was able to afford them, were Sultanate and Mughal era coins. And so I specialized in collecting Mughal era coins. And then when you start collecting coins, what happens is that you realize very soon that you need to, learn the language, because otherwise interpreting the coins would be a challenge and you're always dependent on somebody or the other. So I started, of course, much later in life, learning Urdu. And I learned that for many years. And I was, kind of have a reasonably, decent knowledge of Urdu.
Yeah.
And when I was doing this, I would end up visiting, old flea markets, Johri bazaars, Sarafa bazaars in all the cities of North India. I used to travel Jhansi, Lucknow, here, there, and everywhere, and meet all these people and start collecting coins. But what would happen is that coins would, even as recent as a couple of 100 years ago, minted in cities which don't sound the same as today, right? So I started to get an interest in reference maps from 200, 300 years ago to try and identify those cities. So, for example, Agra was Akbarabad. Delhi had coins from Hazrat Delhi, which is present-day Mehrauli, to Shahjahanabad, which is Red Fort area, to Tilpat, to Tughlakabad, all of these places which have now been subsumed in the broader geographic area of Delhi, right? So I started to collect old maps. And then from old maps, when you used to collect, go to the same dealers, these guys had stocks of other old documents like engravings and things like that. So I started to pick up a few as relevant for the Mughal collections. And of course, then what happens with this habit of these collections can get to become like a bloody disease, because after a while, you get so into them that you start to expand the collection beyond the initial theme. And I'll talk about a little bit of that madness also. And then, of course, one thing led to the other, and, interest in contemporary art, interest in tribal art, interest in old books, all of that. And if you have the patience and interest, I'd urge you to go at some point and see the website, which will give you a much better sense of,
So, Paul,
okay, now,
while you're on the coins, the question that comes to my mind is that is there a lot of information, or was there a lot of information just on the coins? Because if I see the coins today, it just has an emblem, it has the denomination, and I don't even know what else is there on the coins that are minted now.
yeah. So, just to quickly, it's good you asked the question just when I was going to talk about a coin. So this is where the collection started, with coins, right? So I'll start my session also with coins. So this is a rather shabby looking coin, but you know, when I tell you the story, and that's really the challenge of Sarmaya, is the ability to tell the stories in such a way that people get interested in some of these things, right? So in the Islamic world, uh, kingship or rulership or sultanatship or badshahship or whatever we wish to call it, two things established that. One was issue of coin, and the second was the reading of the khutbah in your name, which is the Friday prayers. Allah was invoked in your name if you were the ruler. So these were the two things. So the moment somebody wanted to establish themselves as the ruler, these two things they did pronto. You know, one is they quickly say the khutbah in their name in the masjid, and the second was by hook or by crook start issuing coins. Now coins, in many parts, in for many segments of our history, the only thing we really have establishing our history and the sequence of dynastic flow is coins. There's very little else. There's no literature. There's no inscriptions. There are no monuments and things like that. So coins are very precious, and coins have a fair amount of information. The coins have, in the Islamic coins, usually, coins have the name of the ruler, the year of the rule, the mint at which it is made. There are epithets, sometimes the month, and sometimes it also says, the occasion when it was. So, for example, there were what you call traveling mints when you went to battle. So some coins are issued in the battlefield, as part of payment of wages and things like that. So coins have a fair amount of information on them. And, part of the fun of acquiring coins is to, kind of read through. Now, let me tell you a story. So here is a coin. It's a silver rupee, and it's an emperor called Nikusiyar. And Nikusiyar was a pretender Mughal ruler. Okay, we've never heard of him in our history books. And the only evidence of this Nikusiyar having sat on the throne, albeit for a very, very brief period, is this particular coin. Because in the whole world, there is only this one coin for this emperor. And we have it in the Sarmaya collection. And I was up against, the Getty and the British Museum in the auction, and the auction prices went up. And at one point, I started to, really feel that I can't go on any further. But I was also motivated by the fact that if this coin left the shores of India, it's never going to come back again. And then this guy, God knows, if ever there would be proof of his existence. Now, in a typical Islamic setup, when the ruler would, sit on the throne, he'd gather up all other members of the family, extended family, and literally put them under house arrest. And that place was called the Salatin Khana. And in the Salatin Khana, Salatin is the plural of Sultan. So all the Salatins were put in a walled area. And if you go into the present day Red Fort, it used to be, when you enter, on the right, there was a large enclosure in which these guys were all put. Similar one existed in Agra, in the Agra Fort. Now, the thing is that, up until Aurangzeb, it was fairly clear. After that, things started to slowly fall apart. And then in 1719, there were two kingmakers. One was the Sayyid brothers who were in Delhi, and one was a guy called Birbal, not the Birbal of Akbar's time, another Birbal. So Birbal found this poor soul who was already half, witted, because he had been put inside a house arrest for almost 40 years of his life. They pulled him out of obscurity, sat him on the throne, and declared him emperor. And he issued apparently some coins. And meantime, the Syed brothers rushed in from Delhi, defeated him, took him prisoner, and put him in Salimgarh, which is, when we used to go to the college between Red Fort and there was a red structure on the right. We used to go under a bridge. The outer ring road. So the structure on the right was a fort which was made by Sher Shah Suri, and that fort was the official jail. And this poor soul was locked up there and died there. So he had a brief moment of glory, and you are seeing a coin which you will never see outside of this presentation because none are known to exist. Some can come up, of course, at some point in time, but this is rare. So when I'm collecting coins, sometimes the coin is beautiful, sometimes it's, exquisite calligraphy, there is historicity, there's rarity, there's everything. So this one I'd certainly classify as a rare item, which, tells us about the existence of a particular king. Okay, another quick sample. But
so before that, Paul, just a question that from what you've said, coins in that era actually did more than just denote the value of that coin. It's almost like they were writing some bit of history, some bit of contemporary happenings on the coin, which years later is proving to be useful. So are we in the modern times losing out on creating such historical, not documents, but objects, which say 100 years from today may also lead to certain information being given to the people who collect them?
Well, I suppose one of the reasons is, today there are many more sources of information. In the old days, kingdoms were a little more insular, and things happened with boundaries because access was not that easy, right? So if you had to travel from one kingdom to another, it was probably a many-week journey to start with. So part of that is there. Part of the other thing is that this, in many ways, in the old days, it was physical wealth in your hand, right? So the gold, this is pure silver, and there was copper. They were the three typical metals that were used. And, when you had that level of wealth in your hand, you had the ability to also put that, little more investment in the information that you put on that coin. Today's coins are, literally almost worthless now. And while they do have some information, for example, here on the left side, right at the bottom, it says Akbarabad, which is the mint. In the present day coin, it's a symbol. So if you look at your 50 paisa coin or 1 rupee or 2 rupee coins, you'll see a little tiny symbol, sometimes a diamond, sometimes a star. Those are all marks of the mints. So Nasik mint, Bangalore mint, etc.
Right.
So there is information there, but it's less relevant in today's context. Okay.
So this Nikusiyar, I also read that this coin told you that this Nikusiyar had this deep desire to be the ruler of Hindustan at least once. How did you get that?
No, so there is a gentleman called Hodiwala who had done research on coins, and there were some references in the British Library also. There is actually a little snippet somewhere as part of another thesis or essay where this was mentioned that all of these guys, once Aurangzeb was done in 1707, thereafter it became almost a free-for-all. There were, in the known people who issued coins in the Mughal pantheon, there were 29 of them. And we literally know the top 6. The rest came and went, some hung around. There were 2 who actually did hang around for long periods, like Shah Alam II and, Muhammad Shah. But the rest were there sometimes for, 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, 1 year max before they went out. So yeah, all of them had ambitions at some point because they felt there was a sense of rightful claim because it's somebody's uncle who was the previous king, somebody's dad who was the previous king got usurped by the nephew, etc.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's another sample quickly, and this is important because this is a gold mohur of Emperor Alamgir II. Okay, and he is named Alamgir II because the first Alamgir was Aurangzeb. And why this coin is important is that Aurangzeb actually removed the kalima. So in the coin on the right, in the square, is what you call typically the kalima, which is the La ilaha illallah Muhammadul Rasulullah, you know. So that thing was put on the face of the coin. And essentially, Aurangzeb removed it. Said, listen, these coins fall into the hands of the non-believers and they'll defile this kalima by their handling. So he removed that from the face of the coin. And interestingly, his namesake, Alamgir II, who came a little while later, reintroduced this. So this is the first reintroduced kalima on a gold mohur, and we have it in our collection. So it's interesting because at some point, some of these guys felt that there is no problem, you know. They had far more, you know, syncretic belief in, you know, the people. So they were quite cool. And remember that, you know, a lot of these guys were children of Hindu moms. You know, nowadays we get all worked up about some of these issues and everyone's about a camp or the other. But those days, you know, these emperors were half, sometimes 3/4 progeny of Hindu parents or mothers, you know. So in that sense, they had a very different approach to what they felt was necessary and not necessary.
Yeah.
Okay. This is another genre in the collection, and I put this here because this is a fabulous photograph taken in 1879 by a guy called John Burke when the British had, you know, gone all the way into Afghanistan. And so this is the Bala Hissar, which is the main fort in Kabul. And this is the bunch of people standing in front of the fort gate and being photographed by this guy called John Burke. Now, must remember that there was an interesting coincidence because photography literally started in the mid-19th century. And in 1857, because of the mutiny, the British came upon vast swathes of territory, and they actually commissioned tons of photographers to document the empire. So it was not necessarily about aesthetics. It was also about just capturing kya kya hai, you know, what all is there in our empire. So they would, you know, capture monuments, they'd capture landscapes, they'd capture profiles of people, etc. And, you know, these are one of the few areas where we kept literally pace with the rest of the world in terms of the photographs being taken literally 10 years after photography was discovered. So in India, we have photographs from the 1850s and literally albumen printing, which is this type of photograph, is from 1849. It first started in France in 1849 and literally a few years later, it was in India. Now this should be familiar to all of us because often the university special used to go under this gate when it was coming from inside the Lal Killa. This is the Kashmir Gate. And what's interesting is that this is a photo taken literally a few months after the mutiny.
Wow.
So there was this guy called Felice Beato who actually was photographing the Crimean War. And then the British government said, you know, run to India. There's a huge monumental event that has happened there and capture that for posterity. Of course, he landed with his brother in Calcutta by the time the mutiny was over. But he went right across North India, literally photographing the aftermath. And if you see just in the middle of the photograph on top, you can see the St. James Square church spire, on this photo. So this is, you can see the rubble. And the biggest damage to this gate happened from Nikusiyar, which was, the garden. I don't know how many of you had batchmates. There was a whole bunch of Lals and Mathurs and Narayans who were staying. They were all in college with us. They were staying right opposite the Nikusiyar. In fact, we used to go across there often for a meal. I had a lot of batchmates from that family, a bunch of Kaists who were living there.
They still are, Paul.
Eh?
They still are. I'm married to one of them. So they still are living there.
Yeah, no. That whole place was full of them and they were all in steeples, right?
Yeah.
And bang opposite them is the Nikusiyar Bagh, which was a garden made by one of the Mughal emperor's wives. And the British commandeered that, and from there they bombarded Kashmir Gate, and all these are, marks of those bombs which had, blasted the gate open. Okay, and this is of course a panoramic view of the same thing past its walls. So this is the walls of the Red Fort just after the 1857 mutiny. So we have photographs in the collection from that time. It's a great feeling to see literally these things come alive.
Yeah.
And then of course we have some very, very rare photographs in our collection. The gentleman on the right, of course, you may all know, is Wajid Ali Shah. We have a photograph of the man. He, of course, was one of the main reasons why the mutiny started, because he had gone to Calcutta in 1856 and they had actually arrested him and put him under house arrest in Calcutta. And he never got to come back to Lucknow, to his beloved land. So this is a photograph from that vintage. And the man on the left is also somebody who the British loved to take everyone who they wanted to keep a close eye over to Calcutta. So this was Tipu Sultan's son, Ghulam Muhammad, who was Tipu Sultan's, of course, 14th son. But all the same, the man was there in the custody of the British. And these were some of the big monumental events that had happened. So 1799, the siege of Seringapatanam, and 1857, the mutiny. And after that, they were literally in charge of the country. And these were two people who were, the remains of those two epic events that happened. And this is again a very rare engraving, Triptych. It's a 3-part thing, and there is a wonderful story about this. This is the siege of Seringapatanam. It's the last Anglo-Mysore War in 1799, depicted in a painting. It was originally made by a guy called Robert Kerr Porter, and it was a 120-foot long painting.
Wow.
And it was put up in the Guild in London, and a few million people came and saw it. And he actually did this painting entirely from hearsay. He never came to Seringapatanam. And then this painting was copied for the benefit of the VIPs. So this was a copy that was made in 1803, literally 4 years after the Battle of Seringapatanam, for the then Viceroy. And it's amazing because there is a key. They actually have a key, which we have, which says who are some of these key personalities on the battlefield, including Tipu Sultan right up on top on the left. And some of these paintings, the representation is so accurate. It is unbelievable that somebody could have done this purely out of hearsay. So the extreme left is the temple within the fort complex, and on the right you see the 2 spires of the Jama Masjid within Seringapatanam. Yeah. Okay, so that's a little bit. Then of course, the collection has a lot of indigenous tribal art. It's one of our particular strengths, and this is a very interesting, rather simple-looking painting, but it's a story of a wonderful a guy called Jangarh Singh Shyam. Any of you are familiar with indigenous art? He's the legend in this particular genre, which is called the Gond art. It's in Madhya Pradesh, and Jangarh was a young kid in the village, and when they were making the Bharatiya Bhavan in Bhopal, Swaminathan actually, who was given charge of the project, went looking for tribal artists to invite to Bhopal. And when he and his team were going around the various villages, they came upon this youngster who was doing some stunning work on the walls of his villages. And they brought him to Bhopal, and he started to work on the walls of the museum in Bhopal. And also, for the first ever time, he was given paper to work on. So this was one of his early works on paper. And then he became a bit of a celebrity. He went off at the invitation of various countries, including his last visit was to Japan, where the Japanese were so enamored by him, they requested him to stay back and extend his stay and do more work with the Japanese museums. And Jangarh, being the simpleton who was advised never to part with his passport, they asked for his passport, and Jangarh was also slightly depressive. So Jangarh panicked, and he actually strung himself up and committed suicide in Japan. And what happened as a consequence was that his entire village literally moved to Bhopal, and they all started painting in the genre. And today, it's a huge body of work, which is typically called the Jangarh Kalam, in the way of Jangarh. So any of you interested in Gond art, you will hear this term Jangarh Kalam. And in today's context, they are really lovely, paint everything about stories from nature, the connection with nature and things like that. It's always a joy to see their works and literally their connection.
So Paul, can I just ask a question around tribal art? So tribal art, as we've, at least as I've seen, is very different from the other pieces of art that we see displayed in people's houses. So what is so special about tribal art? It's more rustic, it's more amplified in some way. So how is tribal art so different, and what makes it as valuable as it is?
So it's like this. To my mind, some of these definitions are very difficult definitions to put and hard code, right? If you look at it, originally, I would say these were community traditions. They were handed from one to the other to the third. And often it was about visual representation of stories, which they were otherwise always telling each other from one generation to another. So it was in some ways a group initiative. There were individuals who'd paint, but they'd draw on common stories. They would draw on common traditions of representation and things like that. So in that sense, you can say Gond art, okay? But in some ways, it kind of dumbs down the artists themselves, And today that has mercifully changed, because some of these artists are incredibly independent in their uva and style. They may have come out of that community, but they're doing some incredible things of their own. So there are many, many pockets in India. If I have to just shoot 10 off the top of my mind, I'll say Matani Pachedi in Gujarat, Gond in Madhya Pradesh, Bhil in Madhya Pradesh. This particular painting in front of you is Mithila from Bihar. There's Saura from Orissa, there is Pattachitra from Orissa, there is Pattachitra from Bengal, there is Tolu Bomalata from Andhra. So there are these community traditions which have ended up in visual representation of one kind or the other, which is of great interest because they are community, they are story, they are visual representation, they are tradition, and they are variants, So for example, Tolu Bomalata, which is a leather puppetry in Andhra, is different from leather puppetry in Tamil Nadu, is different from leather puppetry in Kerala, Karnataka, and Odisha. Origin-wise, the same.
Yeah.
Differences arise in terms of the representation. Differences arise in terms of how they, take specific characters in the Ramayana, in the Mahabharata. So, for example, in Andhra, they rely on what they call the Ranganatha Ramayana. In Tamil Nadu, it's the Kamba Ramayana, So the Ramayana itself is different. And that's one of the beautiful things about our country, Every place has a different format, a different story. Sometimes it's the same old, epic, but it is told in a million different ways. So this is again another one which I think is, beautiful. It's from the Mithila tradition in Bihar. Again, it was never known to the world till 1939 or something when there was a huge earthquake and there was a gentleman called Archer, who was one of the district officials, who was walking around in this village and he suddenly saw all these crumbled walls lying, in the rubble with beautiful work on them. And he asked around and they said, we have been doing this for hundreds of years. This is Mithila art. And he actually documented it and put it out in one of the early Mag issues, I think in 1946 or 49 or whatever. And that was the first ever time this art form came into the public eye. And of course, since then, there have been a lot of patronage, Pupul Jayakar, they got all of these people. And you won't believe it, out of 2 villages in Madhubani district, we have 5, in Jitwarpur there are 3, and in a couple of others there are 2 Padma Shris, of this art form.
Yeah.
And so it's just incredibly beautiful. Of course, Mithila again, the place is sacred because Mithili is the other name for Sita.
Yeah.
And this was the kingdom of Raja Janak, Sita's father, and therefore this whole place is very blessed. And when you go there, you see some really beautiful history, the forts and things like that, palace complexes that are there. It's far away. It's in the northeast of the country, literally 5 hours drive from Patna airport, but wonderful stuff. Okay, so here for all of us who must be familiar with this is an engraving. This is the engraving of Shahjahanabad. Guys, we used to travel past this to college, at least most of us who came from Central and South Delhi. So this is from the London News, just after the mutiny. They had drawn what Delhi looked like just before the siege. And if you see, I don't know can you see my cursor?
Yeah, can see.
Okay, so this part was completely cleaned out so we lost so many, buildings, monuments and palaces. And somewhere here at the back near Chowri Bazaar was the first original building that housed St. Stephen's College. Okay.
Right.
So right here somewhere.
Where your cursor is the Red Fort.
No, Red Fort is this.
Then what is that? That also has a large courtyard.
That's Jama Masjid.
Oh, that's Jama Masjid.
That's Jama Masjid. This is Chandni Chowk right down. Okay. And this is, Nikusiyar Bagh, and just beyond this, of course, is college. Okay. And right here, where the cursor is almost to the right, is a cemetery which was carved out to bury the British who died in the capture of the fort. And the guy who led it was a guy called John Nicholson. And so if any of you remember, just opposite our school football grounds and fields is the Nicholson Cemetery. So college had its grounds near Mori Gate, if you remember. It still has.
Yeah, I think they had. Yeah, I remember the athlete friends used to go some.
Now it is no more and has been handed over to DMRC.
Oh, I see. Okay, because where I'm showing this cursor, this is where we had our grounds.
Yes, sir. Till late 90s it was there. After that was handed over.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so just sorry, go ahead, Sonu.
No. I was going to ask you, because when I was seeing through the various tabs on your museum, there were also some incredible maps, and they showed positions of the troops around, around the siege and all of that. So that I was just linking that to this.
Yeah. So if you see, so this is around where Kashmir Gate is. This is where all the other Mori Gate, of course. And in the corner there, over there is Lahori Gate. Right on the other side there is Ajmeri Gate, and that little extension there is where Zakir Hussain College is, which was founded by one of the nobles, So, and this is Delhi Gate, right here. This is Turkman Gate. So, I mean, there were a bunch of gates around, so as you know. But yeah, so the maps, that showed, positions they had on Bala, actually on the ridge, Flagstaff and the ridge, So we used to go over the ridge to college. Literally, that was where a large part of the batteries were positioned, which bombarded the foe. Okay. So this is, again, just to show you. So I got interested in collecting evidence of Delhi in whatever form. So that was from an engraving from the London Illustrated News. And on the left is a painting. It's actually a print, wood print, which is made by Zarina Hashmi. And it's exactly based on that engraving, if you see. So, but this is a very graphic representation.
Yeah.
Okay. She just died recently, but again, an awesome printmaker. Okay, so this is a very new one, very contemporary one, but this is again made by a guy called Saju, young artist from Kerala, and what he has done is he's actually burnt a Google map of Connaught Place and all of that, the whole area around central Delhi, where all the powers that be, and that if you see there, that is the Yamuna. And if you see here, what he has done is he's actually burnt the wood. This is work on wood. And he's burnt the wood, and he actually says there are clouds over the landscape. I think he was trying to make a political statement. And then he was talking about, if you see at the bottom, and I've enlarged that here on the right, these are representations of state power, and on top is representations of the people and how one is trying to, dominate the other. So it's an interesting thing, but it's also coming out of a representation of Delhi. So this is very, very contemporary, just 2 years old, as you can see.
Yeah, so I find it fascinating that while, routinely books are banned and films are banned, paintings like these, which also carry a subtle message or maybe not so subtle message, kind of don't come into the eyes of people who have the authority to ban, or people who have the authority to create a nuisance around it.
Well, see, the thing is that it does happen. It's not as if it doesn't happen.
But that's mostly religious paintings that are.
Yeah. I think political messages and satire and all these things are still a little, maybe.
Also, while this is very interesting, and I don't know how everybody is on the time,
Yeah, you let me know how I'll go faster then.
No. So, after this, there were a couple of questions around not the paintings, but around the fact that this culture, we have so much of rich culture and heritage in our country, but our children don't seem to be aware of any of it. So how can we as parents and then later as grandparents, and through the work that people like you are doing, how can we get the newer generation in connect with this really rich and vast heritage that we have? But you can answer this after you're through.
Okay, so let me just go through this and I'll certainly answer that question, because it's one of the basic raison d'etre, or why we exist as Sarmaya. It is to try and achieve that little lacuna that needs to be filled as you're talking. So some of the things that I do is that in my collection journey, there are some quirky pieces, and those are things like I suddenly see, because and this is in an oblique way to answer your question, Sonu, is if you have patronage, you also have the thing blossoming. So if you see the Museris Kochi Bayanale, it's a recent initiative. Barely, I think 3 rounds have happened.
Yeah.
Every 2 years, there's this massive, art thing that happens in Cochin, and it really has helped Kerala artists blossom. Now today, for example, as we speak, there is a very beautiful exhibition going on in Kerala. It's called Logame Tarvada. The world is, my home, in Alleppey, organized by Bose Krishnamachari, who was the chief organizer of the Cochin Biennale, but bringing together Kerala artists. And there are almost just under 300 of them from across the world. And it's a fabulous collection. So when you patronize, in some senses, you also have, these people blossoming, feeling a sense of security to experiment and also grow in number. And I'll talk about the other bits in just a bit. So let me get on. These are some really beautiful works, very contemporary, by Indian artists resident overseas. So this is Ritika Merchant. She lives in Barcelona, and she draws from mythology, Greek and Roman mythology to represent things. This is a artist who's based in London. He came to Jaipur, studied the miniature tradition, and now paints everything, drawing inspiration from 100 different things, but very, very rooted in the Indian miniature style. Now here, this is a quick one. Again, it's about identity. I have started a project 4 years along with another artist. So we do this work together. This is something that harks back to my ancestry. So I belong to a group of people called the Knanaya, who migrated from a place called Sanli Urfa in southern Turkey and settled in Kerala. And it's been hundreds and thousands of years since all of that has happened. Traditionally, there have been many migrations into Kerala from the Middle East, and people have made it home. And yet, you can even today be othered. You are this, you are that, you are put into many little boxes, right? So one of the things I wanted to address was this whole issue of identity. And one of the projects I'm doing is this thing called the Isa Nama, where we tell the story of Jesus, the life and times of Jesus, but in a very, very rooted Persian style. So the whole thing is inspired by the Hamza Nama, which was made in the court of Akbar. So it's in the style of the Hamza Nama. And I work with a miniature artist called Manish Soni, who's based in Bhilwara in Rajasthan. So this is one of the scenes from the Bible where there's calming the storm. This is my representation of the Last Supper. If Christianity was an Eastern religion, and it was initially till the Romans became Christians, and then everything became a Western version of the religion, right? Otherwise, Christianity would have been an Eastern religion. So if they were to sit and have a meal, they'd probably sit like this on the floor around a fire, right? And this is inspired by a very famous miniature painter called Nain-Suk. So Nain-Suk had done a similar work of people around the fireplace. So this is a project I'm doing. All 2022 works are done. I'm hoping to complete a set of 36. This has got shown around the world now. It went to the Rietberg in Zurich and things. So happy to share this with you. Okay, this is to come to your point, Sonu. One of the things we try and do, and I work with a bunch of Stephanians on this. This one on the left is an image from a school in Lucknow, which is run by a batchmate of mine, Lakshmi Kaul. It's called KK Academy. And the story with this is, we went to the school and we talked to them about a particular form of tribal art. And then we said, here is a theme, and we said fantasy. So these kids made, images which in their mind were fantasy objects and used the particular art form. And then, of course, what happened was that we said, we can't just, let this go to waste. So we got somebody, and Lakshmi facilitated that, a copyright story writer, and they wrote a story with these fictional and fantasy characters, and that was made a play, and a theater director came on board, and they performed this play in front of a 1,500 strong audience in Lucknow.
Wonderful.
And these kids now, of their own accord, have been making movies, videos, paintings. The teachers are excited and things like that. So the one on the right, if you see, is again another batchmate of mine with whom we work, Pratham, which is Rinki, Rukmini. So we do a lot of content for Pratham. So if you see the bottom one, it's a video for the leather puppets of Andhra, made for Pratham, which we do, and then share it. And we do a lot of work with kids. So whether it is making kits during COVID for parents to download and help and sit with the kids, to actual work in schools, to movies about topics of Indian culture, art, heritage. We do a lot of work. So one of the things, of course, to answer your question is that we need to go beyond numeracy and language literacy in our schools. We really need to teach people how to tell stories, because in objects to inspire stories, there are a million. In India, you'll never be short ever for objects to tell stories about. The thing I seem to have lost is that ability which all our dadis and all had. Beautiful, we all have heard stories from grandparents and parents. That art of storytelling has been lost. Today, everything is so textbook, oriented that people are bored. And if you're telling stories, you better tell them in a different and interesting way. And that's literally the only way, I think, in my personal opinion, that we are going to be able to make a change. I don't think we can expect too much from central authorities or, schools are now slowly, and I must say government schools are really, really, in many parts of India, embedding art, culture, history, heritage into their curriculums. They work with us. I know that for a fact, where thousands of kids are learning this art of storytelling. And I think that will, in the long run, sustain this whole interest in our own heritage. I really feel that that's the way forward.
And also, without being political about it, how to generate and how to inculcate that pride in the culture, pride in the heritage that is India. And now it's kind of acquired political sides, but without getting into the politics of it. How do we get? I mean, when I was growing up and in school, I remember anything to do with the Indian heritage was kind of looked down upon. I was in a convent. And I would assume that the elite schools where children of all people like us go to, how can we in those, because they will later turn out to be influencers and opinion makers, how can we get that pride in our heritage and culture, those seeds to be planted there, instead of looking down on what was ours? How can we get them to be proud of what is ours?
Yeah. So I'll, again, I went a couple of years ago to, and I'll tell you the two different approaches. So I was in Udaipur in the City Palace Museum, right? And the school had come, and it was obviously something that had to be ticked. Some box somewhere had to be ticked. Ki field trip ho gaya, museum trip ho gaya. So the kids, there were about 200 kids, and these kids were told to hold each other's hand and walk in a line. So this was literally a snake going through the museum. And there were two teachers in front, there were two teachers somewhere in the middle, and there were two teachers at the end, and there was another smaller bunch of teachers who were just gossiping among themselves. And this snake weaved its way through, up stairs, downstairs, through halls and all. Every time a child stopped to ask something, they'd say, shh, chup, and keep walking, keep walking. So in about an hour, this walk was over. If you remembered anything visually, you were lucky. This outing ticked some box somewhere for whatever it was worth, right? I also went, and this, sorry to, sometimes, you say, what a bloody patronizing bugger. I went to UK, to the Blenheim Palace, and that was the house of the Dukes of Marlborough. And one half was the formal residence even today. The other half was a museum. And there I saw, again, a bunch of teachers taking a bunch of 30, 40 kids and going past, not stopping at anything. So I stopped the teacher and I said, ma'am, can I understand why you are not explaining anything? She said, no, today's a field trip is about studying only one object. And so they have this huge tapestry of the Battle of Waterloo, and the Duke of Marlborough won the Battle of Waterloo for them, right? So it was in the family, it was an heirloom, obviously, this huge 30-foot tapestry of the Battle of Waterloo. So these kids were made to sit in front of that. And I asked them, can I please join? They said, yeah, please, you can sit at the back and listen in. So I sat there, 2.5-hour session on that one work. They talked about tapestry making. They talked about Anglo-French politics. They talked about army formations because there was cavalry, there was infantry. They talked about the time of the year because there was snow in the back on the hills. They talked about the trees which were there on the field. There were oak, there was maple, there were all these kind of trees. So they talked about so many things which you could draw out of this one object. When you asked about that coin in the beginning, similar thing. Now these kids will never walk past another object similarly. Just, they will think, at least something will be, provoked. And I think that's really the thing. It's the method of how we do this, right? In terms of teaching them, in terms of sharing, in terms of actually making them touch and feel, etc. So I think that's really the thing, the way we engage, the way we tell the story.
So, either we can wait for the government to change the way curriculum is structured in the schools, so according to you, what can each one of us do in our own homes with our own children, nephews?
Is it me or have I got?
Sorry?
No, I lost you for a minute. You
Okay.
got frozen on the screen. So you asked about what each of us could do?
Yeah, without waiting for the curriculum to change. What can, like we have used to have kunjis. So give us some kunji tips on what can we do to help the youngsters in our own families develop this habit.
Well, I think first and foremost, let's pick up some of these things and learn the stories behind them. Am I audible, or am I also,
I think
my signal is bad?
yeah, I think your signal's a little wonky. If you finish the presentation, then maybe we can have you on screen.
You can hear me now?
Yeah, can hear you. So now,
Am I audible now?
yeah, you are.
Okay.
Yeah, now.
So I think the issue is simply this, Sonu, that we have to have this as a a campaign and a mission. And first of all, I think we must also invest a little bit of our time in some of these stories, and then where possible, uh, help along. We, for example, work with some of these NGOs which are working with kids, and people like Pratham and Learning Links Foundation are working with large numbers of kids. So this uh, indigenous art videos go out to Pratham's audience in only 3 states, and we reach 60,000 kids.
Wonderful.
Now, the thing is, if we can reach more, so we do a lot of work with schools in Bangalore, Delhi, Bombay, Lucknow, and all of these places. But if we could expand that, I mean, I have certain limitations to bandwidth, of course, but if there are ways we can expand this a little bit, work with schools, co-opt some schools to be the apex downloading institution in a particular city or a town. There are many ways to do this, work. There are many NGOs who are working with large communities of children. Little bit of effort in terms of creating content for them to download. One of the things that we have learned in COVID is that sometimes, storytelling has to be in the most basic form. We may have access to, virtual reality and all of that, but at the end of the day, this poor kid doesn't even have access to a smartphone.
Yeah.
We found that, when COVID started, we had about 60% of the children access to a phone which are belonging to one of the parents, of which 50-50 were smart and regular phones. And then 3 months, 4 months into the pandemic, parents started to find jobs and they started to take the phone along with them. So the 60 came back to 30%. Yeah. And literally 70% of the kids had nothing. So then we started this whole concept of a resource person and volunteers. So, I mean, I work for the Hinduja Foundation. I told all the Hinduja group companies, guys, come on, let's get some. So we had 700 volunteers who actually, we said, forget math, forget language, do something which engages the kids. So somebody was doing magic shows, somebody was doing, threading something, somebody was doing art, somebody was doing just reading a story. And literally the kids were absolutely delighted, as long as we could reach some and get. So some of this, there's a new world that's emerging. If you have access to a phone, yes. Pratham has access to, iPads. Kids have got groups of 5 have one, some of the villages we have now managed to put TVs in, either the temple compound or in the panchayat office, and kids are bought there. But if there are bigger villages, there are issues there also, because during COVID, they're not permitted to come gather in some places. So all of that is still a challenge. But I think it's something that each of us, if you do even a small bit, go to a couple of schools, tell a few stories, get the kids interested. You tell us what you want by way of tools. We will be glad to provide that. We provide a lot of learning tools for teachers in the in the field. And if you want, you're always free. The whole thing is free anyway, so you can access them. whenever you want, or at least point some people to this and say that if you want some of this, please get in touch with Sarmaya, and we'll try and see how best we can, reach them, tell them the story, and things like that.
Yeah. No, so this has been fascinating, actually, Paul, and thank you so much for your time and the lovely way that you've taken us through our own history. So thank you.